And we're live. Hi, everybody.
Hey.
Welcome. Hey, Chris. How are you doing?
I'm good. I've had quite the month. COVID round 2, trip to Mexico where I caught COVID. But I got to watch the Figma keynote poolside with Margarita, which was not terrible. So,
Yeah.
How about you? How's things?
It's been great. It's it's a little bit different trouble for me, but I'm in the Denver area, so there was like hailstorm and flash flood and stuff like that, and I was like bucketing water out of my window well on the 4th of July, which was suddenly my window well got an upgrade. It became like aquariums basically, so that was fun.
Nice.
But yeah, apart from that,
koi, they can float by the window.
Yeah, exactly. But everything is good now. I'm back in order, and I also moved. I'm like in a different part of my house right now, so that's I'm digging the new office space.
How's the whiteboard behind you? I've been debating having like a rolly whiteboard. But I don't know. I didn't move into this space all that long ago, and so I'm still kind of getting comfortable with it.
Yeah. So this is the one thing that I miss the most about like remote work, is not being able to just jump on a whiteboard with like a peer or whatever and like jam on it. And I'm a visual person. I need to like write down stuff, and so for me, like, this is the best compromise that I found, because like I don't know, like I have an iPad. I guess you can technically like use a pencil or something like that, but so far I didn't see the right tool that would actually give me the same experience as like just like being in the same room as somebody.
I mean those pencils, that technology sneaks up on you,
And so having that board is actually better than nothing. So I can actually, like sometimes I just like bullet and like show stuff so nobody else can interact with it, of course, but it's better than nothing.
At least you have whiteboard markers.
Anyway.
Well, hey, let's reintroduce ourselves. Like, this is the Design Systems Field Guide. I'm Chris Strahl, one of the hosts. Christoph, go ahead.
My name is Christoph Kouzukis, and I'm basically a design system lead, and this is episode 2. And Catherine, unfortunately, is our co-host, but I mean, unfortunately, she's on vacation, so
she's having a great time somewhere. She's poolside, hopefully not watching this.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's great. But episode 2, we're trying to get a little bit crisper around different things. Maybe the first thing and the main thing that we can talk about is the fact that have people join us on the line to actually talk about what they're doing or their struggle, or if they have questions and stuff like that. And so we're trying to get better at this. But I think I actually have a banner somewhere. But the idea is really to be able to, like if you want to participate in the session, if you want to join us, like anything and everything design system related, we really encourage you to actually, basically submit, like a tiny form. I can show it to you. But, the idea is for you to just be part of that show, like we want you to. It's just a type form, and we're going to ask you like a few questions, but it's more or less to understand what you want to talk about, and then like try to schedule you. Fortunately, today we actually have 2 guests on the show. We have our special guest that we announced, Donnie. So for Donnie to join us. Hi, Donnie.
Hi, folks.
What's up, Donnie? Good to see you again.
Good to see you. It almost didn't happen because all my computers decided that they didn't want to give me any audio. So I'm on my wife's computer.
Wow.
And it's funny because I was working. I have a huge, AV setup. I tested it all out last night, and Murphy's Law comes in, no audio. I'm like, this is great. So here I am now. I finally made it.
Cool. Great. Well, welcome. And, you're our first special guest, so forever the first, which is great. So, we're super happy to have you. And later on, we'll actually have also another guest that wants to talk about one specific topic. His name is Oshki Tsunoda, but, we'll we'll make him join us a little bit later, because right now what we want to do is talk with you, Donnie, and hearing, what's up with you, what's new, and if you have like anything you want to share with the community.
Sure. So I guess maybe I don't know if you introduced me much at all yet, but my name's Donnie. I've been in the design system community for quite a while now. I guess a little bit before it was actually kind of formally called Design Systems, but more formally, I was the first UX engineer at Compass a few years ago, and now principal engineer at GoDaddy. And I moonlight as a instructor over at Parsons School of Design here in New York, doing user research and interaction design education. So, but on top of all of that, a few weeks ago, actually during Config, I also launched my new consultancy, which is called Design Systems House. And that's located at ds.house. It's a very, very short URL. I'm very proud of it. And admittedly, I'm looking to consult mostly with design system adjacent products. So maybe like a place like Knapsack, for instance, would be a place that I would like to work with closely. But admittedly, I'm not, going to like gatekeep anyone that's really interested in design systems and wants to have the expertise. But we are dedicated to the future of design systems. So we're really trying to push the envelope about what we could be doing in our practice. So a lot of different kinds of research studies and really moving forward, 10, 20 years and seeing, what it really means. So those are the big things I think I'm doing, but I have smaller things that are going on as well. I think one of the things that I'd like to share that's top of mind for right now for me is this idea of token operations. So this is something that the Token Studio folks have been doing a lot of work on, and with an idea called a resolver. Takes a token, design token, and kind of is able to transform it based on some rules into something else. So a very simple example of that might be taking a hex color, and then when you need to add opacity to that hex color for some other token down the line, instead of rewriting that token with the opacity, you basically just point at the base token and say, I want some opacity to it, and then assign it to a new token. So the way that the Token Studios folks are doing it is kind of specific to their platform, which is fine. What I'm interested in specifically is working with the Design Tokens Community Group folks to figure out what that might look like from a more, I guess, holistic or platform agnostic point of view. So trying to see what that might look like. And I have actually a response to the spec that I wrote up about a month ago, and I'm going to be taking some time to actually make that a reality potentially, so that it's a little bit more tactile and visual, so that there's a little bit more understanding behind it, because the initial kind of prompt is a little bit heady, so it's important to like get that down to earth.
Great. By the way, I personally, what I love about you is you always have like very interesting point of view, whether it's like on grid or tokens or things like that. I just wanted to also basically just, I think, like I'm still, yeah. This is your blog, design system, what is it? Donnie.D'Amato.design. And I think, yeah, specification is right there. Token operations too. But yeah, there's a lot of good stuff and interesting takes, I feel, on your blog. So I definitely invite people to have a look, because I feel like you have a lot of interesting takes on stuff. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's actually interesting mentioning that as well. I had someone reach out to me literally last night and said how the On Dark virus post, which is one of my most famous posts, I guess, is was something that they couldn't wrap their head around initially, but when they actually got to that particular problem, they really enjoyed how that helped them understand what that problem is and how to solve for it. Because what he kind of thought was like, okay, this is a hot take, I'm not going to take it, completely at face value immediately. And I'm realizing that now that some of that stuff that's in like the hot takes kind of collection is less of hot takes and really more guidance, right? And I have to be a little bit careful about the way that I present that, because sometimes, it could be easy, or no, I shouldn't say easier. It would be better to present this stuff as actual guidance, as opposed to being that hot take that's meant to, get a rile out of people.
I mean, it's an industry that's desperate for standards, man. So I think that it's like, hot takes end up becoming the way of working very often. I mean, we're still young, right? As a community, like there's still a lot of people that are trying to figure out how all this works together. And so, guidance, gospel, hot takes, it's all kind of the same thing right now. So I appreciate the thoughtfulness, and also, like, by the way, wish you a huge amount of luck with this consultancy, because I think that you're going to be great at it. But trying to get out there, like ways of working that we can all rally around. It's one of the big reasons why Knapsack is been a full-throated supporter of the W3C working group around design tokens. Having standards in the industry just benefits all of us, and so just trying to push so hard on getting like a best practices out there that people can kind of research and rally around. And I love your blog for a lot of those hot takes, because it pushes that idea.
Thank you. And also congratulations on your SOC 2 compliance. I read that recently.
Yeah. To talk about painful things that end up being understated. But yeah, you were talking about the design tokens thing too, in Token Studio, and we were pretty extensively with those folks as well. And in case anybody missed it, we had that chat with a bunch of the W3C folks a couple of months ago, and Knapsack also released a bunch of open source tools that are associated with design tokens and design token management. It's definitely like tools for builders. It's mostly about like converting design token data. But if we want to throw a link up for that, it's another good resource if you're getting into design tokens and you have a decent technical understanding. It helps take a lot of the data that comes out of any of the places where design tokens live, like Token Studio or Style Dictionary, and gets it into the format that's consumable by your products.
Let me try to show that to people so that they have a better
It's literally a GitHub page. It's not that exciting, but
very exciting. Look at it. I've never seen anything like it.
But yeah, check it out. It's cool. Like we've started to get some folks that are stoked on it. But yeah, it's all about like how you're able to package up your token data.
That's cool. I feel like there's a natural transition, like between this and maybe like, like one part of like one idea that we had for this format is also like talk about like between the last episode and this episode, what happened new in the design system world. And for me, like, I guess the main thing is Figma config.
Yeah.
And related to that, the introduction of Figma variables and how does it play out with design tokens. And so talking about, between what you mentioned, Donnie, and, like this work at Knapsack and, like, I feel like hot topics in general, I feel like definitely like one topic that was, top of mind for a lot of people were actually like, how do we make sense of Figma variables? Are they design tokens? How do we, like implement them, not implement them, things like that. So I have some opinions, but okay, Chris, go first.
Yeah. No, let me start this one because like we're actively engaged in a project around this right now, which is interesting, right? So we have a big enterprise customer, and our integrations with Knapsack have largely been with Token Studio, and so it's been about like how do we gather that token data, how do we do like JSON exports and stuff like that from that token data to be able to get things into Knapsack, and then once you change something in Knapsack, how do you get it back into Figma? And so that bi-directional idea of this has always been like the most difficult part. It's pretty easy to get stuff out of Figma, pretty hard to get it back in. And so one of the nice things about variables is it supports a really good engineering workflow with the API calls. And so for those that are unfamiliar, variables is a token-like implementation inside of Figma. It's not totally fully embracing the W3C spec. There's some things that with modes and stuff like that are still kind of like, we don't entirely know how this works or how to use it. But the reality is at least you're able to get basic data about your design tokens or variables out of Figma via an API call. One of the things I don't like is it's only accessible via the enterprise plan. I think that it's a little bit annoying that we've end up in a situation where like, hey, look, 60% of users of Figma are engineers, and so we need to monetize those people. But hey, that's where we're at. And so what is really great about the variable system is it's literally native functionality. Now, that's not to say that Token Studio doesn't also do really cool things and honestly does some things better than what Variables does. But we're doing our first project where we're actually like directly integrating API calls from Variables into Knapsack, and it's going really well. And the base reason why is that bi-directional capability is much simpler with the API call than it is with like, how do I ship files back and forth between systems?
From my side, that top post that's on that page that you shared, Chris, is spicy specifications, and that was written in the airport in San Francisco, going back to New York.
Nice.
After config. So yeah, it's very much a top of mind kind of thing that happened after config. I was there in person, watching all this, the entire room go absolutely crazy when they announced the variable stuff. And the TLDR of that particular take is it was a very conscious decision for them not to choose the word design tokens. And actually, they've talked about this particularly because they wanted to have their own ecosystem that supported that behavior, but also gave them the opportunity to invent new behaviors, specifically the modes as an example, right? So they are able to do lots of things faster than the spec could potentially define them, which is similar to the stuff that Token Studio is doing, that Specify is doing, that any other folks that are doing design tokens related specifications is doing. And the expectation, of course, is that the spec is informed by all this stuff. But what I was criticizing in particular is that it's very challenging right now for anyone to know what a design token looks like, because there's so many different kinds of design tokens out there that are all trying to do the same thing, but the specification is ever so slightly different potentially between many of them. And at this point now, there's a lot of folks that are, of course, doing transformations to get them either close to the spec or close to something that they need. And that's my recommendation at the end of that post is basically saying there needs to be something tagged onto a particular expectation for a design token, file that says this is following this specification, this is following that specification, whatever that is. And the design tokens community group, of course, have their own that everyone's trying to agree with eventually. I think the way that Specify actually did it, where they actually called it specified design token format, SDGF, and talking that's their specification. It's meant that it's their specific thing, and it's actually a transfer format, which is a little bit different. But I was recommending that Token Studio potentially do something similar, just so that they identified this particular format away from the community group until it is the community group standard, right? And just to go ahead and identify that for folks that are potentially confused about why doesn't this work here or there, because again, this all of these different formats.
So you're basically saying that we need to tag whatever system or structure this comes out of.
Right. It's more like a small branding exercise, if anything, right? Just to give a little bit of clarity.
Yeah, I mean, and that could actually be a token value in and of itself, is where does these tokens originate from? It is interesting because, excuse me, the working group's specification has an extensible side to it. And so I was a little bit surprised to not see a lot of that formal extensibility embraced yet. And I mean, maybe that's because the spec is still young and whatnot. But I think that the idea of allowing for relatively easy extension of that specification is that they want to use that as a test bed for what ultimately ends up in the specification. And I was sort of surprised to see, I mean, maybe not that surprised. Like you said, they're inventing their own ecosystem at Figma, and I get that. But not having any sort of extensibility for modes into the spec was a little bit surprising.
Well, There's an issue that actually Jake from Figma opened up. It's issue number 210. It's ingrained in the back of my brain about which number that is. That goes into a lot of different folks around the industry that are trying to figure out what that means, what modes are in the spec. And it is a very important piece to the spec. And I'm actually, I'm in the, well, I shouldn't say, I'm in the beginning of a project that's going to really highlight how important modes are. But it is a very important thing that needs to be I guess, defined more or less in that specification about what that means for design tokens overall. And it's questionable about also if it even belongs in the design token spec, actually. Because I think that's something interesting about the specification is, especially talking about token operations earlier, one of the things that was suggested was the idea of like adding these kind of operations to the tokens. But in that recommendation, they basically put the keyword like alpha and then a number to it. And then what that does for the specifications, it says now the specification needs to define what alpha means, right? And that can explode in terms of the amount of responsibility the spec has. And I don't think that we really want that, right? So similarly, I think in terms of what a mode means and what that means for the ecosystem overall could also potentially explode depending on the way that people are expecting it to happen.
No,
I've seen that a lot with, like nesting of tokens going down deep in, dark mode, light mode, and all that stuff. So I'm being very cautious about that, particularly looking at it.
No, and in full transparency, we have our own implementation at Knapsack of basically the same thing. And so I mean, we call it sets because people use it for theming, people use it for dark mode, light mode, people use it for all sorts of stuff. And it's sort of like this like baseline organizational unit of how do I create some arbitrary grouping of a bunch of different tokens that represent something I would want to apply broadly to a component. And I was baiting you a little bit with that, admittedly. But the idea of like what belongs in the spec and what doesn't belong in the spec, I think is a really interesting debate because are we talking about tokens or are we talking about every possible way we could use tokens? But I do want to hear a little bit more about what you think about with token operations, because this to me is kind of an interesting frontier, right? And there's a bunch of stuff that's being talked about right now about like component level tokens and should tokens do more than just be key value pairs? And I'm kind of curious where you land on this.
So from my perspective on this, and I probably is one of the hotter takes, is that from first off, I believe that you probably don't need anything more than semantic tokens. People have base level tokens, they have component tokens, they have all these different kinds of tokens. Really, all you need is semantic tokens. And, I see people like, no, I need color 500, whatever. And I just think about the exercise of color red 500. You have to, if you want to change whatever that assignment is, it doesn't matter if it's a hex or color red 500, you're still doing that manual changing of whatever that is. Because color red 500 is just the human name for like FFCC00, right? It's just so much easier to say. That's why we have those tokens. And then the component level tokens on the opposite side of the whole thing is an escape hatch for special snowflakes. It basically says that this component doesn't follow the rules of the semantics that we've aligned with because I feel like it. I've never seen a situation where yet that it's been like, no, there's a very specific reason why this input is different from the rest of the inputs. That's from my perspective, it always doesn't really work out in terms of consistency and user expectations. Going to the token operations thing, of course, though, which is, I guess, what you're initially asking, that part of it stems again from that like alpha expectation, but also from a way of curating your semantic tokens in such a way that you can have, a primary color, a secondary color, and some like, body color that, and potentially a handful of other colors that you can assign to a, theme essentially. And these operations per, at each token will take whatever color that they've assigned and transform it in such a way that it'll be correct for your particular, small set of colors. So as an example, maybe your primary color is like a blue, and your token operation takes that blue and makes it makes it darker for when it's used on text in a hero image or something like that.
Right.
And that operation just takes that token and does what it needs to do with it. There's a UI editor for or theme editor for Microsoft Fluent. I'll have to find the link for it. That's out there that basically does exactly what I'm talking about. Takes 3 colors and then shows you what it would look like in your UI by tweaking colors as they go through, their kind of operations. And it also gives you all the actual semantic tokens that are being used underneath as well, if you wanted to tweak those too. And I think that method of curation for themes is really accessible, because it's entirely possible that a particular theme could have hundreds of token values that you would need to figure out what the values are for. And if there's any way that we can reduce the amount of time that we're trying to do that curation, I think it's going to be beneficial. So that's what the token operations come in.
Do you think of this as more as like the context that a token is being used, or do you think it'd be like more like adaptive color, where you just have like an adaptive pathway that is your token implementation? Because we're experimenting with this too, right? Like we're sitting there trying to think about like, okay, so I can create a token set. Line height's my favorite one. So you can say like I have line height, but like in Android I don't. And so like what does a line height value translate to from the web that ultimately shows up in an iOS app or an Android app? And that ability to transform that based on the context of device is an interesting idea. Now there's like, that's one very straightforward example, but there's dozens more that I could think of off the top of my head of places where this stuff matters. I'm curious, like, are you thinking about this as this is the system making decisions for you based on context, or is it making the decisions based on other tokens that exist inside of your theme or your collection?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned context, actually, because that's potentially related, but I don't think it's part of what I'm thinking about right now. At the moment, it's very surface level, where it's, I have a token that exists today that needs to be transformed into some other, token, and we reference those tokens, across the theme in some way. So that's the base level of it all. And admittedly, yeah, there's a world where there's a Android line height token that takes the web token and figures out what the hell to do with it.
Yes, that's 4 tokens or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So whatever it needs to do, it knows what to do because of those operations that we've put on the Android token based on this, root level, or core level, primitive level, whatever you want to call it, token that says, okay, this one is line height, and I'm going to transfer that to web, Android, iOS, TV, your watch, all that stuff. So I think there's an opportunity for that there. When it comes to the context piece, which I think is actually the mode level stuff. Again, I'm not sure it belongs in the design token specification as much as it might belong to the platform that expects that particular mode. So as an example, the way that we handle light and dark mode on the web is different than the way that it would be handled on Android or iOS or anywhere else in particular. So the way that request is happening for those particular values is different, but it needs to know which one of those themes really to grab at any one point in time, and it's always going to be different from platform to platform. So I think the definition or that context that says I'm thinking about light mode at this moment in time is really important. And that's also some of the criticism I have about some of the stuff that was in the mode issue in Design Tokens Group, because people are like, again, doing that nesting thing where this token in light mode does this, this token in dark mode does this, and it's just like cascading pyramid of I'm not sure how to manage this these tokens. But
then you end up with just like a class system that's arcane, where we've all seen systems of utility classes that are like, here's 10,000 utility classes. Now, what actually is ultimately the thing that this reduces down to when I'm applying styling to an element, and nobody can figure it out. Nobody knows where that's coming from.
Right, and that's the problem with the base semantic component token, methodology. Which, I mean, admittedly, Token Studio and also Adobe Spectrum now have a visualizer for that, and that could get really gnarly. To just
It's
see
like
all
X
the
state for
paths around.
tokens.
Yeah, there it is, right there. Yeah, so that thing is super gnarly. Depending on the way that you map everything out.
Oh, holy shit! I haven't seen this yet. Whoa.
Yeah. So Token Studio has something similar to this, yeah, it's that mapping that we're talking about from base to semantic to component is another reason why I just recommend just doing that semantic level. That one level there, it makes it a lot easier to maintain. But granted, there are these visualizers that make things helpful, and there's definitely some helpfulness when it comes to communicating, what these values are as well.
Now, Katie, we want to get to your question, and I'm so excited about this topic. I've been talking a lot, so I'm sorry. I mean, isn't this kind of the point of tokens, is to reduce complexity? And by adding all these different layers, we're literally adding an exponent to our complexity every time we add one of those layers. That's my big thing here, right? Is when I think about like what we're trying to accomplish, is we're trying to make this a lot easier. And it feels like every time we dump another layer on, we end up making it harder.
100%. Yeah, I'm 100% behind you on that thought. Every time I see these layers and these tiers, we would be calling them, and I see the nesting pyramid inside of some of these examples, and I go, it's too complicated, folks. We got to pull it back. We went too far.
I wanna introduce maybe like another perspective on this, but maybe more from the design perspective. But I feel like right now, I agree with you that I feel like those layers were created to try to solve for a problem. But I think ultimately, like trying to cherry pick or hand pick every value for every token, like kind of like made that, like the only solution available. When I totally agree with you. Like when you were talking about tokens operator, I actually believe that in the design system world and like trying to figure out a design language from a designer perspective, I want to believe that there's a way where we have more like programmatic design kind of vibe, like where you actually have rules, like you will not, and exactly what you're saying, right? Is like, you cannot just like do it by hand anymore. It's not possible. So find rules and store those rules somewhere so that there will be, like maybe 10 colors that you actually handpick yourself. And
that's the hard thing. Yeah.
Everything else, colors is the right, like is also like the main example, but it's also like I remember years ago now that Spectrum on Adobe, they had like a talk about like how they create all their icons for all the platforms that they're supporting. Same thing. At some point, you obviously like have to automate, and nobody's going to actually like hand drawn every icon every time.
This is the realm of AI eventually, right? And honestly,
Also,
like soon, if you have your baseline palette and you want to make a lighter palette, a darker palette, a palette that has an opacity gradient, like taking Donnie's Red 500 example, like the AI should be able to tell you what Red 700 is if you need something that's darker. Or it should be able to say like, here's what that looks like in HSL if it needs to be in that format. Like all of those things that like are effectively derivative, like we should be able to automate away most of that based on rules. Because it shouldn't just be text boxes, right?
And not just that, but also I don't believe that we can have like one designer responsible to knowing all those rules that apply, to accessibility or, like technical solely because of that platform, like maybe something, what is the color mode that is, optimized for performance for that particular platform and things like that. I would much rather trust a computer that knows all those, like where those rules are integrated, right?
But I mean, are you in the minority?
Well, there's a challenge there, I think, folks, right? There's two challenges, I think, about this. Because the first thing is what Christoph was saying is trying to define what those rules are. That means that the designer can communicate their intentions. And that's very hard for a lot of designers, right? When I ask them, for example, why is the input in this particular location, or why is it blue, or why is it this particular color, they have a challenge to try to justify the reasoning behind that often, Because if we can justify those reasoning, provide that intention, that's the rule, right? That we're trying to make. We're trying to make those rules to identify the reasons why we're doing this, so we can repeat them. And then going to the AI comment, of course, is the second problem is that trust. Designers have difficulty trusting the AI to make those decisions, and I think it could be improved if it was apparent that the decisions that the designer was making influences the AI directly, right? Because if the AI is just doing magic box stuff, then the designer is going to go, it doesn't know what the hell it's doing. And that's because it probably didn't get any information from you, right? You didn't give it any information, so it's just doing, whatever it thinks is right. If you actually work with the AI, you can develop a trust that the AI is going to produce, hopefully, the thing that you're expecting to come out of it. But the less that you trust the AI, of course, the less quality work you're going to get in there, and the less you're going to trust it, and it's just going to be more of a separation throughout. So that's why folks that are leaning into AI are really leaning in, and folks that are not are really not. And there's a great divide happening.
Yeah. So I don't want to turn this into an AI talk because it feels like every time I end up diving into this topic, I end up doing this. But I did an Into Design Systems talk about the role of AI here and how this is actually not just about one type of AI. This is like 4 different types of AI that we all interact with, and the human element attached to that is really important. So I think you check that out at Into Design Systems. But anyway, like we should get to Katie's question. Yes,
let's do that. Let's do that. She's got 2 now, I think, right?
Yeah. So first one, Kitty asking, I will probably sound novice, which I am. We're all trying to figure it out, so you're fine. To break it down, you can add an operation token defined internally or whatnot, and then potentially punch out X number of themes.
Okay. So I think this is a question talking about token operations.
Yeah.
And here's the general gist of token operations. Inside of the design token specification as it is today, each token is defined as an object, and that object has a value and a type and potentially some other stuff on it. The thing that token operations is introducing is a additional key on there from where it says value and type that says operations. And operations would be an array, basically a list of operations that you would take on the given value to create a new value. So as the example I was providing earlier, let's say that there's a hex color on there for a red, and this new token that I'm trying to create is this kind of like a translucent red. So I have to add some opacity to it. So what these token operations would do is it would take that value, that just hex value there, and it would parse out the pieces to make it into an RGB. So you can, start putting an alpha on it. I mean, granted, you could put alpha on hex too, but sometimes it's not supported. But we'll assume that we're going to transfer it to RGB. So we're going to parse out the hex into RG and B, and then parse the ints so that they're 255s, and then we're going to throw whatever alpha was given into that function, and then concatenate everything back into an RGBA string that could be used elsewhere. So each one of those steps is doing something to like a previous step or something of that nature to get a new value. Could you potentially create new themes from this? Absolutely. And that's kind of what I was talking about with the Microsoft Fluent idea, which is that you choose 3 colors or a handful of colors, a handful of values, and you have themes that can basically figure out what to do with those couple of values that generate all of the values, all of your tokens from that smaller set. And that's what the operations is doing.
Yeah, and then does this also apply to things like high contrast and grayscale for web-based products all driven on some code snippet that's a meta tag? Is that controlled by the operating system? Yeah, but you have to know what to feed the system once you have that tag defined. And so this is all about like what do you actually produce? And yeah, like I think that this is the big question, right? Is like what does a mode actually mean? Light mode and dark mode, high contrast mode, grayscale, all those are clear definitions of it. Is a mode a theme? That's another big question that I don't think is well answered yet. Is a mode a state? Probably not, but like there's some ideas of using it for states as well. I mean, Johnny, Christoph, I'd be interested to hear your all's take on this because my conversations so far about what is a mode have been very, very far flung and far reaching.
I have I'm working, like I said, I was working on a project that's actually revolving around mode, because I actually think it is potentially as important of a design paradigm shift as responsive design, to get it, in my opinion. I think it is that important, as a design, strategy. It's less about the engineering of it, less about necessarily. I mean, tokens are involved in it certainly, but in my opinion, just like what Figma was kind of displaying about moving like a component from one frame to the next and seeing things change, translations happen, topography even change, making those, or actually I guess topography doesn't change with variables, but things that are able to change across those frames, that visualization is very powerful. And I guess to kind of go a little bit into a little bit more detail, I've mentioned this on Dark Virus. So the solution for on Dark Virus and the token name. It's not something that you want to do. It looks like something you might want to do, but ultimately you actually don't want to. But the solution to on Dark Virus is to create a new context that says in this box on this larger page is dark. Right? It's not saying that this button necessarily is an inverted button. It's the same button. It's in a new context or in a new mode. And that's the thing that I think is going to be a paradigm shift for moving forward with design. That's specifically talking about color. But I realized recently is that my work on complementary space that I released late last year also is talking about mode. And I think there's a big relation when it comes to that ultimately.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about how that is implemented as well, because browser support for that is, there's constructible stuff, there's like, variables, CSS variables, stuff like that. But like how that actually gets implemented, I'm curious, like the mechanism whereby that shows up as a rendered HTML page. But
that mechanism, in the web at least, is here today because it's as soon as we got CSS custom variables, right, that is all you need because we've had class names or selectors. Because this is the thing about CSS variables. They're scoped. So once you go down into a level, you can change what all those variables mean inside of that scope. And that's how complementary space works in particular. We actually, recommend that you have this like data density shift kind of attribute that gets added as you go deeper, and the values change as you go deeper in there. So that's what the recommendation really is there, is that saying in this particular context for this dark section in this page, you're basically changing a class name, and that class or putting a new class name on there, and that class name changes all of your variables to something different, but it's those variables maintain the same. So if you have button background color in the light part of the page, that'll get those light variables wherever those are. If you have button background color in the dark part of the page, there'll be different values because of the new context that button is inside of. So that's what that design thinking exercise is not something that we've been doing historically. That's where on dark is coming from, and that's where a lot of the other kind of I'll say traditional design patterns have been coming from.
Totally agree. I feel like I remember many discussions that I had to like try to make people understand, especially on the designer side. I feel like the difference between themes and modes, and especially in the light mode, dark mode, context, is like the fact that you're applying a dark theme to a dark mode is valid, but in that context, like it could be actually something different. It depends. It's not the same. Like there's an overlap, there's like similarities, but ultimately those things are different. And so I feel like we're basically more and more embracing that that paradigm shift, right? Where I feel like if you want to design correctly, you actually have to understand, like those contexts and like whatever modes, it's just a term, but anyway. I'm wary of like the time that is already spent. I want to have time to actually talk with Oshki, who is very patiently waiting for us. So Oshki, I'm just gonna add you to the stream now. I hope it works.
Saw it pop up for a second there. There we go.
There we go. Hey, Oshki.
Hey.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you quickly introduce yourself and maybe like, introduce also like the topic that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, sure. So, my name is Hoshiki Tsunoda. I work for a company called Optimizely as a design system engineer. And yesterday I posted about this question, how people merging the design systems on LinkedIn, and Christoph just commented and, made me aware of this awesome streaming. So
yeah, here we are.
yeah, and I just jumped in.
Okay, so
24-hour turnaround. We're all about quick wins here.
Yeah, it was surprising actually. It was okay.
And also, like Donnie, you will be our first guest, like in that new format. So forever first. So
awesome.
tip of the
Yeah,
hat.
thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. So can you talk a little bit more about what was your question? What was your struggle?
Yes. So at my company, we have like 2 design systems now, and it's about time to merge them together. So I was going on, online and, learn about how other people are doing this, but there was not many resources on how to merge the 2 systems, and I feel like this is a common issue for like a lot of bigger enterprises who like acquire a company and they already have design systems, and what they're doing is like very unknown. So I just wanted to, hear you guys' experience, opinion, or stories, of like,
Yep.
those type of situations.
That's a great topic. Who wants to go first? I can, but I also have.
Yeah, you run with it, man.
Okay.
I've said too much already.
Okay. So first of all, I want to say that I'm guessing that your question is more geared toward the technical side of things, but I want to actually introduce the other side of stuff, because I feel like ultimately whatever solution you'll come up with is going to be, I want to say, diplomatic and or political inside of like the merge of the 2 systems. Because oftentimes I feel in the design system world there is the tools and like all the technical side of it, but there's a very human side of that. And so for me, like I've seen also how those things can go like sideways because you're not taking into account the human part of it. And so my, I guess, introduction to that problem, and I will let like more technical people on this live stream to answer the technical side of it, is that it is super important and critical for the success of it to really engage with the people, like the humans behind that, right? I've been in like situations where I was like part of IDS, which stands for Intuit Design System, and when I joined the company, it was a system of systems, and that meant that for all, there was like a history, and basically all products, all flagship products of Intuit had their own design system team with their own sovereignty and governance and like basically autonomy. And so being on top of them, what does it mean exactly, and how we can actually make sure that overall there was a mandate for us to like make sense of it. And so ultimately, it was not, in that particular context, it was not to just replace everything with a new thing. There was a use case to actually have differences, and differentiation between all those products. The main one was that it was, like Intuit has like very different products that are different target audiences. And I feel ultimately that's what matters, right? It's like, who are you building this thing for? And so for us, it basically meant that we moved from that model of like a system of systems to have only one system that was IDS. And then, and this basically like being able to support different themes through design tokens actually, to actually, handle the specificity of each product. So that was a way to actually migrate everything together. Now, I'm telling you this as like, yeah, sure, cool. It sounds great like that. But ultimately, that's long. That's a lot of, like discussions with people, a lot of, like making sure that everybody agrees and, like buy in and stuff like that. And that is more like, for me, like the technical side was non-trivial, but even less than actually the like the conversation that we're happening with all the different partners and stakeholders.
I love that you brought up the architectural side of it too, right? Because it does make a big difference how your design system is architected. I was thinking about in IDS. I was thinking about Wayfair's design system. I was thinking about Cap One's design system. We talked to all those people on the podcast, and they've all had sort of different ways that their system is structured, but they've all absorbed other systems inside of that ecosystem. And yeah, like there's a human process to that, but the interesting part of the technical process there is we oftentimes talk about like what happens if you acquire a company that doesn't have a design system, and how do you very quickly change that product over. We don't oftentimes talk about like, hey, if you're acquiring a product that does have a design system, how do you harmonize those things, especially if they're fundamentally different in their approach or implementation. And I think that the best example I can think about is like, first, that design system has to be pretty decoupled from the actual application implementation itself. And so, there's oftentimes a lot of overly deep ties between the design system and the product that design system serves. But provided that you're ended up in a place where you have like a truly decoupled UI system that's there, you have a bunch of design files that are organized in a similar or same-ish way to your code patterns. It's about trying to understand, is this a new subsystem in like a federated model of design systems, or am I actually bringing this into some sort of core system? And the answer is probably a little bit of both. There's probably some core componentry you want to bring into, that foundational model that exists for your design system. And then there's probably some of it that is pretty product specific that you want to leave in some sort of subsystem or product system. Where you draw that line is almost like an interface inventory exercise, where you're going to want to go through that componentry, understand what already exists inside of the design system, the parent design system, and decide if it needs to be harmonized or if it can be discarded outright. And if it needs to be harmonized, like there's work to do there, and that's Jira tickets or whatever, right? But then ultimately, like the implementation of the subsystem, that should be something that you hold pretty sacred. Like you shouldn't disrupt that, because that's how that product team functions. And you're not going to wholesale replace that product team. You're going to still need to have them be able to ship product. And so what can you do that is least disruptive to that product system while you integrate that core foundational system up front?
Yeah, I guess I'll finish it out saying that working for GoDaddy, we've acquired a few companies, and one of them most recently was a company called Point, which was a point of sale company, physical stuff. And with that acquisition was a very interesting idea, because the design system is meant to support the organization as a whole, right? We're supposed to be providing those components that are usable across the system as the system requires. And when you do that acquisition of a particular system, theirs was highly data viz, which is something that GoDaddy really hasn't been. We do have data visualizations that have been in the product, but nothing to the effect of what Point was actually doing. So it became very clear during the onboarding process that we were kind of unprepared for handling that data viz kind of support from a design system perspective. And admittedly, I think there's many systems out there that probably don't need to even cover data viz, because it's just not part of their system. We did have a little bit of resources in that area. So that's I think a matter of really, well, I hate to say it, but it depends kind of thing. It's assess, if you can, what Chris was saying, kind of what's the least path of least resistance to get them close to what you're doing, or it's entirely possible that that brand is maintained, and that happens with GoDaddy as well. We have a couple of brands that are maintaining, like they're selling GoDaddy products, but they're maintaining their brand, so they don't need that GoDaddy kind of treatment. They can have their branded treatment across the platforms, even though it's still the design system underneath. So it's entirely possible to go in different directions depending on what the business wants, right? It's either they're keeping their brand, they're going to migrate off their brand, and then from a technical aspect, of course, that's going to be a problem as well. I think at GoDaddy, we are a React shop, so our design system is React, generally speaking. So if there's an onboarding that has to happen that isn't React, and actually, if I remember correctly, I might be wrong. I think Point wasn't React. I think there was something else, so it made it even more challenging. So we were considering, okay, maybe there's just tokens that we can do some remapping to and get close for them. So they don't have to do a big rewrite, that kind of stuff. But ultimately, one of the things that I was actually experimenting at Compass, because they were actually in the middle between Angular and React, is web components, because they're meant to, kind of cross that bridge across any framework, because they're supposed to be HTML standard. React has had problems with that in the past, which is the reason why we didn't go full force. React 18 will be better eventually, as we understand it. But those are other issues that I guess you're gonna end up having to solve for as well, because it really is it depends on like business stuff. It depends on engineering stuff. Although generally speaking, from the design perspective, and I might be, kind of simplifying this a lot, but it might just be, a couple of sprints worth of work of getting the designers all in the same room and going, okay, how do we get alignment on the visual treatment of what's moving forward based on the business needs, right? Again, if you're meant to not keep your brand, then there's a direction that has to be taken there. If you are meant to keep your brand, there's another direction that's taken there. So it could be either or.
Yeah, Hoshiki, is that helpful? Is that along the lines of what you're thinking?
Yeah. So for our case, it's still just very much like a concept phase. We still just trying to explore if this is feasible technical in the technical aspect. So like the two systems have like pretty similar tech stack, React and TypeScript. And like some components overlaps, of course. Some buttons are buttons. And they all share like some props, and there's some different functionality in the both, but those can be extended. So I was like thinking, just like Chris says, do we want to merge them together and like just like keep one of them, and then bringing in those extra features from other design systems, and then create like one new whole system? Or what we are thinking is just create a whole new system that covers like both use cases, and while keeping the existing design systems maintained. And eventually this new system is going to outgrow this existing one, and then that becomes like the one core design systems. And like there are many paths we could go, but they all seem like very intimidating. Like if you think about the amount of work, that would
Well, you can go to ds.house and they can help you out. I hear that.
Well, actually, I'll give you some free advice off of that right here.
Also,
we mentioned about keeping the complexity low, right? Mm-hmm. So having two systems simultaneously is going to be complex, right? Mm-hmm. So any way that you can lower the maintenance on that, whether it's picking the one system and bringing what you need in, that's going to be your best thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I'd also say don't underestimate the power of inheritance. The ability to produce something from one system that is then consumed by that other system. That's a great way to incrementally like have one system subsume another. Is if you have more and more of it that's just inherited from a base system, it either allows you to keep the system separate because there's good reason to, like Donnie said, maybe like one's really database heavy, the other is much more like UX UI, user interaction models heavy. But like that concept of inheritance is really powerful, because the more you're able to drive through that, the less there is to maintain across both systems.
Right. Yeah. So the Spotify has their own Encore design systems, and I just read about it, and it's kind of like a big system that supports multiple systems, right? Like there's a foundation, and that stems out to like web and mobile, and each vertical they have like local design systems in web and mobile. And that's kind of like a mental model I was having, just like having some shared components, and then those new two design systems can just consume those, shared like base components, buttons, inputs, and like those basics.
Yeah, I mean, we should get you introduced to them to chat, because it's like the other thing about them that's really interesting is like Encore has been around like a long time at this point, and they've gone through multiple iterations of what that system looks like. and there's definitely like separations by technology stack about like living room devices and then like web apps and then like native apps. But there's also a lot of product sort of fragmentation, or intentional fragmentation is probably a better way to put it in there. Yeah, I'm happy to like we chat with those folks on a fairly regular basis. So I'm happy to connect you up, and
Yeah,
you
that'd
can
be
talk
great.
with them about how they've done it.
Cool. Well, we're almost at time. I think it's basically like we're at the hour. So Oshki, again, thank you very much for joining. I
thank
hope
you.
we give you like some elements of answer. Obviously, as usual, there's no silver bullet to any problem.
Yeah.
So, but I hope with episode tinyurl.dsfg that way to go. Everybody, thank you very much for being there. Obviously, Oshki, thank you. Donnie, thank you for being our first special
Yeah,
guest.
wouldn't happen without you all. It'd just be me and Christoph talking, and that gets boring after like 10 minutes. We start talking about remote work, it gets awful.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. And thank you to the listeners and the commenters. Really appreciate you all.
And yes, Emmanuel, this is recorded, so you can look at it later. So, but anyway, thanks everybody. Have a good one, and see you next month.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.